Well, guess what? It's that time of year again, time for New Year's resolutions. But the question is, what types of financial resolutions should you be considering? Well, stay tuned to this week's episode of the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. And welcome to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm David Scranton, here with my good friend and co-host, Sarah Samuels. And yes, I know we make resolutions all the time, right? We're going to go on a diet. We're going to lose weight. We're going to go to the gym. We're going to work out. Maybe we're going to drink less or stop drinking, right? And those are all great resolutions if we can stick to them. But I think all too often, we don't make financial resolutions. And if you're the biggest part of our audience, those who are retired or maybe within 10 or 15 years of retirement, now is the time to start considering what sorts of resolutions you should be making.
Well, Dave, it's great to be here with you and, of course, with all of our listeners, and Happy New Year to everyone out there. We hope you had a great holiday. But, Dave, speaking of holidays, did you enjoy your New Year's?
Yeah, we were down at the Florida Keys.
Oh, fun.
Of course, it was cold. You know, I know our listeners aren't going to have too much sympathy for us. But,
cold, yeah.
But
define cold.
Well, our cold fronts, we got temperatures at night down in the 50s and daytime maybe 68 degrees. So that's cold for down here. But it was fun. New Year's Eve, we actually found some marina. We were looking for a place to go that had something going on. It's really low key, no pun intended, right? But we found this marina. I figured if anybody knows how to party, it's boat people, right? So sure enough, you go to the marina. They had this great DJ, great party. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's a good bet.
But at my age, though, at 12:01, you just race back to the car and go home. That's it. It's all over.
Ready for bed. Yeah, I was actually surprised I made it to midnight. I think this is the first year in a couple years when I stayed up all the way and watched the ball drop, so that was pretty nice, too.
Well, you're kind of a little bit of an old soul, actually, in many ways.
I like to go to bed early, you know. Yeah. I like to go to bed early, and I like to wake up early, you know. Yeah. So, but it was a nice time, you know, and I think that's actually going to be one of my resolutions this year, you know, maybe spending more time with family. But, you know, a lot of people, Dave, they don't even know where to start, you know, where it comes to their financial resolutions. And I think one of the best ways to start off is really paying down any debt.
Yes. And you know, it's funny because 2 years ago, nobody thought about it very much because mortgage rates were 3%. If you locked in a low rate and were really quick pushing the button, you may have gotten something less than 3% on mortgages, right? Car loans, where everything was basically zero interest loans. Even credit cards were low single digits, and you can always roll them over and get zero interest for 6 or 12 months. So, you know, we didn't notice debt and interest quite as much. But just like now, the federal government is noticing the cost of interest, right? Now that the bond yields are not at 2%, now the government's borrowing money at 5%, right? And that's not fun. Same thing with our listeners. And you're right. That's why I think one of the most important resolutions this year is to pay off debt. Get it paid off, make a plan, and then commit to not getting back into debt again if you can help it.
Yep. Well, Dave, you actually mentioned mortgages, and that has to do with our listener question. Our next Ask Dave question comes from Kelsey out of Texas. She says, I have a mortgage. I was able to get a 4% loan. Clearly, I don't want to pay that off, right?
Well, Kelsey, it depends. Let's talk about this here for a moment. You may or may not. So part of it, you know, part of the myth today after President Trump changed the tax code, or I should say, the way the standard deduction works, is a lot of people think, well, I need a deduction, so I've got my mortgage interest. But for many now, they're taking the standard deduction. They can't itemize anymore. So the first thing you need to do, Kelsey, is say, okay, am I able to deduct this interest, or am I still taking the standard deduction? Because if you're taking the standard deduction, then you're paying that 4% interest with after-tax dollars. Okay, so if you're in the 33% tax bracket, just for example, that means that you're really costing you 6% pre-tax. So that's the first thing. The second thing you need to realize, if you're retired or within a few years of retirement, is that, you know, it's not just a question of, are my investments making 4% or more? Because if I'm paying 4%, my investments are making 6%, I'm ahead of the game. And it's not that simple for two reasons. One, we just talked about taxes. Because all of a sudden, if that's interest is not deductible for you on that mortgage, then your break-even point on your investment return would be 6%, not 4%. So now you have to earn more than 6% to beat what you're paying on the mortgage. Okay? And if you're trying to earn more than 6, I can promise you you're not doing it risk-free. That's for sure. But there's a second issue, Kelsey, and that issue is that when you're making a mortgage payment, you're paying principal and interest. So you have to say, okay, if I've got a $200,000 mortgage, what is my annual payment on that for principal and interest? Now, if I had $200,000 invested, how much interest and dividends can it pay out? And most of the time, you find that the amount of interest and dividends that money could pay out in investments is going to be less than the total payment, principal and interest, on your mortgage. In which case, if you're retired, it's no longer just math about, the interest payment versus how much I'm earning on my investments. It's really about cash flow. So again, 2 reasons that, not so fast to assume that you want to keep that mortgage in retirement, Kelsey.
Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for sending in your Ask Dave question. And if any of our listeners out there have a question, maybe about a financial resolution that you need to make this year and you want to ask Dave about it, all you have to do is send us an email at askdave@retirementincomesource, SOURCE.com. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with Dave Scranton, and we're talking about New Year's resolutions. Maybe you've made a couple. We hope that maybe you've made some financial New Year's resolutions. So far, we talked about paying down debt, specifically credit card debt, and Dave just answered a question about a mortgage. If it's only 4% or so interest on my mortgage, do I really need to pay it off? So, Dave, let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, the credit card debt is, again, a bigger issue now because credit card interest rates are higher. And it's really just a bad habit, Now, I know we see the U.S. government spending money that it doesn't have, borrowing to spend money. So we think, well, it's not, how bad could it be, right? Well, it's bad, right? And so I would encourage each and every one of you listening, I don't care whether you're in your 20s or your 40s, your 60s or your 80s. If you have credit card debt that you don't pay off every month, make a plan now to get that debt paid off, okay? Whether your debt's small enough where you can pay it off in monthly payments out of cash flow in 1 or 2 years, I think that's fair. If it's more than 2 years, then you might need to get creative. And you might need to think about, okay, can I take a home equity line of credit from my house, right? Now, home equity line of credit is still debt, but oftentimes the interest rate is a little lower, and it might be tax deductible. So it might be a little better than maintain the credit card debt, or sometimes cashing out investments. I recently, just very recently, Dave Ramsey said to somebody, I'm pretty sure it was Dave Ramsey, said, hey, sell this investment account, liquidate it, and take the money and pay off your credit cards. And he caught some flack, in through the media with this, saying, oh, well, that's bad advice. This person has this investment account, they need to keep it there. Well, I think it's good advice if you're retired or within 10 or 15 years of retirement, or frankly, if you're anybody. Because the first way to make money, and Warren Buffett said this, right? Lesson number 1, don't lose money. Yep. Lesson number 2, don't ever forget lesson number 1, right?
There you go.
Yeah. So one way to lose money is investment losses, and that's what Warren Buffett was talking about. Right. But the other way to lose money is having to pay this interest out. Okay. So again, all I can do is really encourage you to stay focused, have a plan to get those credit cards paid down in a year or 2 out of cash flow. If you can't, then get creative. Again, you might have a home equity line of credit you could take. If not, you might have to liquidate an investment to do that. Of course, pay attention to taxes on the investment when you liquidate it. That's important also. And in some cases, it might be okay to take a loan against your 401k. But later on the show, we'll talk about why you need to be careful with loans against your 401k. In fact, coming up, we're going to talk about car loans. We're going to talk about loans against the 401k, setting goals, and also the most important critical shift that you need to make within that 10 or 15 years leading up to retirement. That should be one of everyone's New Year's resolutions. I'm David Scranton, here with Sarah Samuels, and this is the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.
Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton. And if you're like a lot of people, you might have made a New Year's resolution recently. Maybe you came up with a whole plan. Maybe you created even a vision board to figure out what your resolution was going to be. Well, we're talking about all of those resolutions today. And so far, Dave, we've talked about paying down credit card debt, why it's extremely important to pay down that debt, and some creative ways that you might be able to do that, including maybe taking out a home equity line of credit. But there are other ways or other debts, in fact, that you might want to pay down, including car loans.
Yeah. It's car loans. You know, most people feel as though, well, I'm always going to have a car payment. Whether I'm leasing a car, I've got a payment. I'm always going to have a car payment. It's just the way it is. Well, I learned very early on in the 1980s as a young financial advisor from a client. First name is Iraj. Iraj, of course, is from the Middle East. And he said to me, he has no debt, right? So as we started to go through and gather information from him, because a financial advisor, right, the first thing we do is called fact finding, right? Gathering information from a client to find out where they are and what their goals are and where they want to go. As we're going through taking notes, he said, well, my car payment is such and such per month. And I looked at him and said, I thought you said you had no debt. He goes, well, I don't. He goes,
That doesn't count.
Yeah, he said, let me be clear. He says, well, the car, what I do is I save in advance for the next car. And I said, I call it a payment. So I pay it with the same discipline into an investment account as you would if you had a loan.
Okay.
He said, but years ago, I calculated that if I had a car loan, it might cost me $400 a month. I don't remember what the numbers were. This was, again, 35 years ago, so probably we're even lower than that. But it would cost me $400 a month. But if I saved in advance, then earn interest for my next car instead of paying interest in arrears for the car I'm driving today, I would actually have a payment of $250 a month. My payment would be about 40% less because I'm earning interest instead of paying interest. Now, you've heard me tell this story a lot, over the years, and recently, the Iraj story has not really held any weight. Why? Because we had zero interest rates. So if you're financing a car, you're getting zero interest rates or low single digits. If you're saving, investing the money, you weren't earning a lot unless you put it in the stock market and are taking risk. So it didn't matter as much. But now with rates being higher, it's a much, much bigger deal. So I'd encourage you, especially if you're approaching retirement, if you're within that 10-year range until retirement or retired, get in the habit of doing this. The hardest part is the first 5 years, assuming you have a 5-year car loan or you're going to buy a new car every 5 years. Hardest part is up front because you might have to be paying off the car you're driving today, making the monthly payments, and then also saving for your next car. But get that done. If you can get that done before you retire, that's great because then in retirement, your payments will be 40% less because you won't have payments. You'll be doing it in advance as opposed to in arrears. And that's important because when you're retired, it's not just about how much income you're bringing in retirement. It's also about defense, keeping your expenses down.
Right. How safe can you make it, right? So let's talk a little bit about 401ks, Dave, because you mentioned this earlier, this concept of maybe taking out a loan against your 401k, which sounds like it might be a bad idea. But one of our listeners, Taylor from Illinois, sent an email in. He says, can I take out a loan against my 401k? Is this the worst idea ever if I really need the money? Well,
if you really need the money, it's not the worst idea ever. But it's not as good as it sounds. See, everybody makes it sound as though, okay, I'm borrowing my own money, so I'm paying myself interest, and that's great. And that sounds good, but you've got to realize that the real cost of that loan is what we call in economics lost opportunity cost, right? It's the fact that that money is not going to be invested. So yeah, you're taking money from your right pocket. Let's say you're going to pay 6% interest on a 401k loan. The money comes out of your right pocket, goes into your left pocket, known as a 401k. Okay? Now the problem is that when that money comes back out again during retirement, it's going to be taxable. So that's one kind of kick to the gut that isn't good about a 401k loan. But the real question is, how much were you earning in that 401k? So let's say you're in some stock funds in there, and the stock market has a great year and goes up 20%. Well, then, let's say this last year where the S&P was up 26%, right? If the S&P was up 26%, the real cost of taking that loan was 26% because your 401k administrator had to take the money out of that fund to lend it to you. And you're paying yourself 6%. So yes, it cost you zero. It's going from the right pocket to the left pocket. But again, your lost opportunity cost, your lost investment return is 26. And now it could go the other way, right? You can have a 401k loan, the market could drop, and you protected yourself from losses, in which case the loan was free. Maybe you got paid to take the loan. So just again, it's nothing is inherently good or bad. At least most things in the financial world are not. The real issue is just understanding what the true costs are so you can compare it to other places that you can go to get money and figure out what the most cost-effective source is for you at the time you need it.
Taylor, thank you so much for sending in your Ask Dave email. And if any of our listeners or even our YouTube viewers out there have a question that you want to ask Dave, all you have to do is email us at askdave@retirementincomesource.com. And thank you for listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it is all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and today we're talking about New Year's resolutions and the resolutions you really should be thinking about making when it comes to your finances. So far we talked a little bit about some personal finance stuff, right? Like you want to pay down your credit card debt. You want to, maybe there's some creative ways even that you can pay down that debt, but you also maybe want to pay off that car loan. Dave talked about a story, his Iraj story, one of his clients 35 years ago, who sort of paid his loan in advance, and it made it cheaper in the long run, which sounds pretty clever. But Dave, when it comes to resolutions, really the first step, no matter what, whether you're in retirement or you're preparing for retirement, the first step is really going to be thinking about setting your goals.
Yeah, of course. And a lot of people, goal setting is hard work, right? And I think that's the reason a lot of people put it off, because you really have to think forward. And then I think people are afraid that, gee, if they set goals, they might be too far behind the 8 ball. They may not be able to achieve the goal, and they're going to feel like a failure. So it's easier just not to set a goal at all, right? If you don't
do nothing.
If you don't set a goal, then you have no risk of failing to achieve the goal.
Yep.
Well, it's interesting because the way the subconscious mind works is that, when you have a goal, something out there you're striving for, it makes, first of all, it activates your subconscious mind. It's a thing called the reticular activating system. It's that part where it says, like, the first day you bought your it's a 350 or 370Z,
370,
that little zippy sports car that you tool around. And yeah, that 370Z, right? Black 370Z. I bet that first day you saw the greatest number of black 370Zs on the street compared to ever before.
Yep. You don't see them too often, but I definitely was on the lookout. I saw a lot of them on the road.
Because your subconscious mind was all of a sudden programmed to look for a black, 370Z. That's just how it works. So when you have your goals that you're shooting for in retirement, your subconscious mind looks for opportunities to get closer to that goal, right? And it's powerful. We have this powerful thing in our head called, a brain. It's one of the most powerful computers everywhere. Well, all of our listeners do, right?
All of our listeners.
They're smart enough to be listening to our show, right?
Absolutely.
Right? And as a result, but there's no user's manual as to how you use it. So the first thing is setting the goals. Your subconscious mind will help you work toward the goal. The second thing about setting goals in retirement is that, it makes saving money less burdensome. We always have to sacrifice things today to save and invest more. But if you have a clear picture of why you're saving and investing, and that picture includes something that's exciting to you down the road in the future, then making that small sacrifice today doesn't feel as bad.
Right, because you're working towards something, just like when you want to retire. You never want to be moving away from something. You're moving towards something in retirement. Yeah,
if there's somebody, when they're younger, if they're saving for a car they really want, all of a sudden saving isn't a big deal if you really want that car. Saving for your first house is not as big of a deal because you really want that house, right? Same thing's true with retirement. And the other thing is in retirement. See, or let's say you set a goal and you want to retire at 66. Well, does that mean you have to retire at 66? No, you can keep working.
Of course.
You could do what, you said to me, we were offline a few minutes ago, that I'll probably work myself right into the grave. That's how I roll, right? But there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to retire at that age just because you have that as a goal. And what's interesting is going to work because you want to, not because you have to financially, is a lot more fun. If you do it because you have to, sometimes it can be a grind. But if you're going to work because you want to, but you can, flip the bird to the boss at any time and retire, that is a much better feeling.
Yep. Well, a lot of people, they need a vision board. They need a way to really think about it, because retirement for people, it can be abstract, Dave, whereas a car or a house is more tangible. So we're going to talk about some ways that you can figure out your goals and ways that you can actually achieve those goals if you're in retirement. I'm Sarah Samuels here with Dave Scranton, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Thank you for joining us here on the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with Dave Scranton, and we are discussing New Year's resolutions, in particular, the financial New Year's resolutions that you should be thinking about making this year. So far, we talked a little bit about paying down debt, whether it's your credit card debt and why that's so important nowadays. Plus, we talked about mortgages, car loans, and even taking a loan out against your 401k if that's something that you need to do. And there's consequences, of course, just like there's consequences for every action. But Dave, I feel like a lot of our listeners, if they're nearing retirement, they might be thinking to themselves, well, Dave, it's easy to imagine, I hung up that bikini for the summer. It's easy to think about, hey, I need to lose weight if I want to fit into it. But it's difficult to think about what retirement actually looks like. How do I set goals for my retirement?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I'm trying to get back in the bikini too by May, so hopefully 4 months will
you got some time, Dave. You got some
time, right? So setting goals, it's important even if you are retired now, because it's never too late to say, hey, what retirement do I want? Some of us just fall into different phases of our life without being intentional. And if you could be intentional about what you want to accomplish in retirement, it'll be more fulfilling. Sarah, I find that those that retire because they hate their job, they hate their boss, they're running away from something, oftentimes they don't live as fulfilled a retirement as those who are moving towards something, who have a clear vision of what they want to do in retirement. And that takes time. So there are some tips here that that I'd like to give you, our listeners, in terms of planning and setting goals for retirement. First thing is you have to practice it, okay? Which means you may have to save up some vacation days, put them all together, and take a few weeks if you can, and just be retired. Just stay at home and just pretend you're retired and see, okay, what are you going to do? What's it like? What kind of routine are you going to fall into? If you're thinking about maybe retiring in another part of the country, well, then you got to travel. You got to check out other parts of the country, okay? Another strategy is talking to friends of yours, people whom you know retired. And it's maybe some that retired and seem to be happy, and others that seem to be bored. And find out what they do and find out what they did leading up to retirement to plan for it, so that you can live vicariously through others and get ideas. So retirement plans are not a static thing, right? Sarah, you're going to put together a retirement plan. You're going to have a vision now. You might be, let's say our listener is my age, 58, and says, okay, I'm going to shoot for 67 because that's full retirement age in Social Security. That's 9 years from now. Well, again, it doesn't mean you have to retire in 9 years. But you start to create a vision over the next year or two of what that retirement looks like and how much income you might need. But that's going to change. Then 2 years out, maybe at age 60, it changes and you want to do something a little different. Maybe you get to age 65 and you've accumulated enough money and you say, I don't think I want to retire at 67. Maybe I'll go to 70, right? The plan is going to change, but at least start with something. Start with a target. And again, you've got to be intentional about it. Don't just fall backward into this phase of life called retirement, because this is the final phase.
Right.
And it's a phase that, you can either have a great fulfilled retirement and love life, or it could be kind of wah-wah, and we certainly don't want that.
Right. You want to practice mindfulness in your life and in your retirement so you can have a more fulfilling retirement. But Dave, you're talking about people that are maybe 5 to 10 years away. And of course, we always recommend talking to an income specialist if you're in that area. But what if you're just a year away? Like our next Ask Dave question actually comes from Leo. He is in our neck of the woods. He's in Florida. He says, Dave, I want to retire next year. Maybe he means this year, 2024, 2025, let's say. What should I be focusing on now?
All right, Leo. Well, I guess the single biggest thing is that critical shift that I'm always talking about. There's the most important critical shift that somebody could make is that shift from being total return focused on your investments, regardless of whether it comes from income or growth, whether it comes from the I or the G. Leo, if you're a regular listener, I always talk about the equation total return equals income plus growth. TR equals I plus G. Income is the interest and dividends that can get paid out to you. And growth, of course, is when you buy something at a certain price and hope it goes up in value. Okay? Now, normally, Leo, I want people to make this shift 10, 15 years out of retirement. But you're lucky. The good news is if you're still in growth and you're still more aggressive, the markets are up. We had a great year last year. The market almost got back to the record high we saw from 2 years prior. So it's a good time to make that shift. Again, the reason I recommend 10 to 15 years before is because, we can be underwater for a long time. From 2000 to 2012, the first 13 years of the century, the market was underwater. So if people didn't make that critical shift, they were stuck underwater for 13 years. So again, Leo, that's not an issue for you, but it's essential to make that shift from being total return focused, like you've probably been your entire life, not caring whether it comes from the I or the G, to focusing on an income first, growth second approach. Now, Leo, notice I said income first, growth second. It doesn't mean you have to give up growth, right? You've been invested probably for growth in your 401k and IRAs and things for most of your adult life. You don't have to give it up, but you've just got to now realize there is an I component, and that I component now has to come first, and growth has to be second. So you can do that through high dividend stocks in the stock market, or you could do that through bonds and bond-like instruments. It's up to you. But bottom line is that is your number one most critical shift you have to make, like almost yesterday, going from the G to the I.
All right, Leo. Well, you know what your New Year's resolution is, right, for this year. Make that critical shift. And, of course, thank you for sending in your question. If any of our listeners out there have a financial question, a retirement question, something you just want to ask Dave, all you have to do is email us at askdave@retirementincomesource. That's SOURCE.com. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton. And if you're still struggling to make your New Year's resolution, well, we have a couple great ideas for you, all revolving around your finances and retirement. So far on today's show, we've talked about some personal finance resolutions you should make, like paying down your credit card debt, potentially paying off car loans and mortgages as well. We've also talked about how you should make saving for retirement a resolution. And there's a way to do that, of course, to make that abstract concept, to make it more real by practicing retirement and actually interviewing people that have already gone through it. And of course, Dave, you just answered Leo's question, right? The most important thing you really have to do is make that critical shift from a total return focus to focusing on the I, the income.
And of course, I said that because in Leo's case, he may have some debt, but he doesn't have a lot of time to pay off the debt unless he's got, non-IRA investments he could sell, right? You don't want to sell IRAs and pay all the tax. So if he's got non-IRA investments that he can sell, maybe that, that can be done. But otherwise, he's not going to do it out of cash flow. Yeah. It's too late. So he's got to focus on offense. You got to focus on maximizing the income.
Well, Dave, how do you do that exactly? How can you focus on the income first and growth second approach?
It's interesting. People ask me all the time, like, what are the tools? What are these income tools you speak of, right? Well, it's the same tools that people had when they were working, right? And they're total return focused. It's no different. It's that every investment can be done with more growth or more income, right? Think real estate. You could flip properties, right? You can buy a property, you can flip properties and go for growth, right? Or you can have rental properties and get income. Stocks, you can be in a lot of technology, high growth stocks and not get a lot of income. Or you can invest in stocks and get income, get pretty significant dividends. Like we always talk about how, a lot of our stock portfolios have dividend yields in the 4 to 5% range, and they still have upside potential for growth or accumulation, capital appreciation.
Yeah. Well, a lot of these things kind of fall under that bond-like instruments umbrella that you mentioned.
And even bonds could be growth-like or income-like, right? There are what's called zero coupon bonds that you buy at a discount, and they mature at a higher value, but they don't pay out any interest, right? That's a growth way to invest in bonds. But most of the time you think about bonds, you think about investing for interest income, for an I. So, so again, everything you think of can be done in a G way or an I way. It's more of a philosophical shift.
Yeah. Yeah. And why do you think it's so hard, Dave, for people to make that philosophical shift?
Well, because they have probably 40 years of habits where they were all taught, hey, invest for growth or don't worry about income. Income doesn't matter because you're not going to take it. You're going to reinvest it. So you just want to get the greatest return. And there's also a perception that the highest return comes from growth, which some ways is true, but it's not as universally true as people think. So you've got this way of investing, this habit, this way of thinking for 40 years. And let's face it, it's in life, in many cases, it's our earliest paradigms that shape our experiences. So it's one of the hardest shifts to make, but that shift starts right between the ears.
Well, we're going to give you some tips to break that habit, right? Break that 40-year habit, and some ways that you can really make that shift in your mind to focusing on the income first as opposed to the growth. So all that coming up. I'm Sarah Samuels here with Dave Scranton, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.
And welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's always all about the income. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and today we're talking about financial New Year's resolutions, especially if you're retired or within 10 or 15 years of retirement. So far, we talked about paying off debt, credit cards, car loans, even 401k loans, why the story about paying yourself interest isn't as good as it sounds, and even in some cases in retirement, paying off mortgage debt. We also talked about goal setting, the importance that the fact that you want to have a target of retirement in terms of age and income, something to shoot for. Even if you get closer and you decide not to pull the ripcord, that's okay.
Absolutely. But the most important thing, Dave, the most important New Year's resolution you need to make, especially if you're near retirement, is making that critical shift from focusing on total return to focusing on income, an income first approach. So, Dave, how much income can the average person get if they make this shift in their investments?
Well, it's interesting because, a couple years ago, in a bank CD, $1 million might generate 1%. You might get $10,000 a year. Yeah. Now, we were always able to get our clients pretty consistently 4% net of fees. So $1 million could generate $40,000 a year of income, even in the bowels of the interest rate environment 2 or 3 years ago, right? But today's a different story. CD rates have gone up. You can get some CDs today at 5 or maybe a little over 5, which means that, in theory, $1 million nest egg can get somebody over $50,000 a year of income. But Sarah, you have to be careful, because if you look at CD rates carefully today, you notice that the short-term CDs pay high rates, but you're not going to find a 10-year CD paying a high interest rate. As things go out longer, the rates go down. Yeah. And that's that inverted yield curve we always talk about, the fact that short-term rates are higher than long-term.
Yeah. And why is that such a problem, Dave?
Well, it's a problem because, if we learned anything from March with the regional bank failures, it's because they didn't match the maturity of their assets with the maturity of their debts, right? You always want to try to match that, or you're taking a risk one way or the other. And you got to say, okay, retirement, financially speaking, is a liability, right? Is it a short-term liability or a long-term liability?
Long-term liability.
Hopefully, God willing, it's a long-term liability.
30 plus more years, exactly, long-term.
That's right. So you don't want to fund a long-term liability with a short-term asset. So it may sound great that you can get 5% FDIC insured, but the banks, the financial markets are telling you that's not going to last forever. But you still can get 5 to 6% income long-term. And depending upon how much risk you want to take, maybe even pushing 7% long-term. If you want to make that shift from total return focus, regardless of whether it comes from the G or the I, to an income first, growth second focus, which means, Sarah, to answer your question, $1 million today could generate $50,000 a year of income, or maybe even more. And that's why now is the perfect time, I believe, for people like Leo that didn't make that shift. I'm assuming he didn't make the shift, right? To make the shift, because not only is he so close, but it's also important because now rates are high and they're not going to stay high forever. So it's a great time to lock in, if you will, more income given every dollar you have in retirement.
Yep. And I think that shift starts really with talking to an income specialist, someone that's going to be extremely knowledgeable in this. They're going to be experienced in getting their clients' income. And you can always check out retirementincomesource.com to find an income specialist in your area. And our next Ask Dave question actually has to do with that. So we have a question from Aaron in North Carolina. He says, what you're saying really makes sense, but why hasn't my financial advisor mentioned any of this?
Well, Aaron, that's kind of a loaded gun question, because I don't know your financial advisor. So I don't really know the answer in his or her case, the business model and why they haven't had this conversation. But I will tell you in general, a lot of financial advisors don't have this conversation with you. They don't know how to do it. And I think there's a couple reasons why. Number one is there's retirement planners. And those retirement planners that do a good job getting you total return, growing your money leading up to retirement, are often not the best people to take you through that transition stage and into the income stage of retirement. So that's part of it. The other part of it, I think, why a lot of advisors don't think that way is because, they've been taught by the industry. And the industry wants growth because if they can make your money grow faster, they could charge more in fees. So the whole industry makes more money, whether it's fees or commissions, if you can get higher returns. And yes, over the long run, in theory, higher returns come from growth, come from the G, right? But most advisors don't realize that that's why they've been taught this, right? So they use faulty strategies, such as the withdrawal method. Well, you can have $1 million, you can withdraw $40,000 a year, 4%, even though you're not getting that much from interest or dividends. And that is a cancerous strategy. Aaron, if there's one thing I could tell you is please, please, please don't use the withdrawal method. Don't spend principal in retirement. Make sure you're getting your retirement income just from interest and dividends. Other advisors will use buckets of money, which is another withdrawal method. You withdraw the first bucket in the first 10 years of retirement. Then you withdraw the second bucket and then the third bucket. And again, you're gambling as to how long you're going to live and what the markets are going to do. So again, if I can tell you one thing, it's make sure you're not spending a dime more than you're getting in interest or dividends. And like I said, old habits die hard. They die hard for individuals and they also die hard for financial advisors. So, Aaron, I hope that helps.
Yep. Aaron, thank you for sending in your Ask Dave question. And if any of our listeners have a question that you want to ask Dave, all you have to do is send us an email to askdave@retirementincomesource.com. And thank you for listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with Dave Scranton, and we hope we've given you some great ideas for a New Year's resolution concerning your finances and your retirement, if maybe you haven't selected one just yet. So far, we've talked a little bit about paying off your debts, particularly credit card debt. We've also talked about goal setting and why that's so important, and in particular, how people can really practice retirement. It can be an abstract thing for a lot of people, but if you practice retirement, and if you interview people that are already retired, you can really get a better idea of it. But Dave, most importantly, right, the most important tip, the best thing we can offer our listeners today is making that critical shift. Yeah. Yep, focusing on income first and growth second.
Yeah, and it's tough. Aaron's question was a good one. Why don't most advisors make the shift? And, I think it's important to realize that attorneys specialize, right? If you want a good estate plan, you probably don't go to a divorce attorney or a real estate attorney, right? Whereas if you have it all of a complicated real estate closing, you probably don't want to go to an estate attorney. So attorneys specialize, and doctors do too. In fact, doctors specialize in phases, right? If you think about it, you have a pediatrician when you're young, and then you have a primary care doctor through most of your years. And if you get old enough, you might have a gerontologist, somebody who helps you more in the advanced ages, right? They have specialties. Sometimes you outgrow the doctor.
Yep.
And it's just, you think about school too, right? You had teachers in high school. You probably had favorite teachers in high school, right? But eventually you outgrew them.
Move
went
on
to college,
right? Favorite professors, and then you move on from college.
That's right. And you don't keep, you don't stay in college forever, and you don't keep paying college tuition forever. You learned what you had to learn, and you move on. You graduated, right? And I think the problem is a lot of people realize that you can graduate from a financial advisor too. You can outgrow that advisor. And I would say plainly that any single one of you that's listening here today that has a financial advisor who has any plan other than generating your retirement income from interest and dividends, or possibly annuities. Annuities are the other one. We don't talk about annuities a lot in the show, but they can guarantee an income, right? But if you have an advisor that has a plan, any plan other than that for generating you retirement income, then I would take your wallet and run, not walk, but run away from that financial advisor, especially if you're within 10 years of retirement.
Yeah. I think that's a big sign that you may have outgrown that financial advisor, and that, in fact, it might be time for you to check out an income specialist and talk to a financial advisor that does specialize in income, that knows all the different tricks to be able to get you that income each year. And it's a lot safer than relying on the market. Like Dave mentioned, there's time periods where the market is underwater. You do not want to be stuck underwater when you're in retirement.
That's right. Absolutely. And speaking about that, what was your New Year's resolution, Sarah? You You tend to, you're a bit of a booze hound. Did you say you're going to stop drinking or something? Or?
Well, actually, Dave, my New Year's resolution is to take more vacation. So be on standby for
That's
those,
awesome.
those vacation times coming in.
I'm only teasing you, but I want to know whose bottle of Tito's is sitting in the refrigerator in our studio here that we're doing the show from today. But I don't think anybody's going to fess up, so I guess I'll never know.
Not mine, not mine. Maybe it's our production crews. Who knows? All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it is all about the income. If you want to listen to this episode again or check out our past episodes, all you have to do is go to retirementincomesourceradio.com.
Absolutely. And please invite your friends to join us next week, same time, same station. But most importantly, we hope that you're here also on the Retirement Income Source, where it's always all about the income.